He wasn't supposed to be there that night. Not in that dimly lit restaurant tucked away from the skyscrapers he owned. Not in the company of ordinary people who had never stepped into his world of glass towers, private jets, and seven-figure dinners. He entered silently, hiding behind a wall of pride and loneliness, dragging his wheelchair-bound son along. His son, once a bright spark of laughter, now quiet, robbed of his rhythm by the cruel accident that money couldn't reverse. And then it happened. A waitress, young, black, and unnoticed by most, placed a tray on the table and looked at his son, not with pity, not with fear, but with something else. She took his trembling hand, rose gently, and whispered, "You lead." And in that single fragile step of a dance, a billionaire father saw a truth that shattered him. A truth about dignity. A truth about prejudice. A truth about his own soul. The father, Richard, had always lived in a fortress built from gold. His name appeared in magazines, his face at charity galas, his signature on deals that shifted entire industries. People saw him as powerful, untouchable, a man who could bend reality with money. But behind that fortress lived a truth he could never buy his way out of. A son who once danced, laughed, and ran across marble floors, but now sat in silence, bound to a wheelchair. Richard's love for his child was never in question, but his shame was. Not shame of the boy himself, but of the eyes that followed them in public, the whispered comments that carried pity like venom, the strangers who smiled too much or looked away too quickly. He despised the world for how it treated his son, yet he despised himself more for hiding him away. When the accident had taken his son's mobility, Richard threw money at the wound as if wealth could undo fate. Specialists from Europe, therapists from clinics that charged enough to build hospitals, machines, surgeries, miracle programs that promised movement again. Each time they failed, he grew harsher, colder, retreating into silence while his boy shrank into himself. Eventually, Richard stopped trying, not with love, but with presence. He withdrew his son from the world, private tutors instead of schools, long silent car rides instead of playgrounds, empty mansions instead of birthday parties. In Richard's twisted reasoning, he was protecting him from pity, from stares, from cruelty. But in truth, he was hiding his own wound, terrified of being seen as a man whose billions could not shield his family from suffering. On the rare nights he did take his son out, he picked places that were designed to protect men like him, rooftop restaurants with exclusivity lists longer than novels, private lounges where polished staff knew better than to look too long at the wheelchair. In those spaces, his son was still invisible, but so was Richard's pain. He thought invisibility was a kindness. He convinced himself it was safer for both of them. He told himself the world did not deserve to see his son struggle. Yet beneath those layers of rationalization lay a hollow truth. He could not bear the reflection of his own helplessness in the eyes of strangers. That night, though, fate seemed crueler, or perhaps kinder, than his routine. The limousine had broken down blocks away from his usual haunts, and his assistant, frazzled, booked a reservation at a restaurant Richard had never heard of. It wasn't grand. It wasn't gilded. It wasn't meant for men like him. But the music drifting from the doorway was warm, almost human, and the scent of food carried memories he hadn't let himself touch in years. He rolled his son inside, shoulders stiff, armor on, ready to endure a meal he would forget by morning. Yet he had no idea he was about to be stripped of every illusion he had clung to. Maya had learned early what it meant to go unseen. From childhood, she carried the weight of expectations heavier than her own body could manage. Her mother cleaned houses. Her father disappeared before she was old enough to ask why, and survival became her inheritance. When her mother passed away too soon, Maya stepped into a role she never asked for: sister, mother, provider. At just 23, she juggled rent, bills, and raising two younger siblings who still dreamed even when she had given up her own. And yet, inside her lived a fire that refused to die. Dance had once been her world. The stage, the lights, the rhythm. It was the only place where she wasn't invisible. When the music started, she became something more than a girl from a neighborhood the city forgot. She became freedom itself. But after her mother's death, dreams had to be traded for paychecks. The studio lights dimmed, replaced by the flicker of fluorescent bulbs in a restaurant where her uniform told the world who she was before she even spoke. At the restaurant, customers rarely asked her name. To most, she was just Miss or Waitress. People talked over and around her, never to her. Men dismissed her with impatient hand waves. Women sometimes ignored her existence entirely, and more than once she had overheard the mutters about her skin, her hair, her place in the world. She had grown calusas thick enough to smile through it, to carry trays with grace, even when the words dug like glass. But beneath the calusas, she still carried a dancer's heart, one that beat in rhythm with every song the band played in the corner of the restaurant. She would catch herself swaying while filling glasses, tapping her foot while taking orders. And for a fleeting second, she remembered what it felt like to be seen. That night, her eyes fell on a boy unlike any other patron she had served. His father's suit screamed money. His wheelchair whispered tragedy. And yet it wasn't those things she noticed. It was his hands, restless, twitching against the armrest as the band played. It was his eyes, shifting quickly to the rhythm, trying to follow a beat his body had betrayed him on. She saw not brokenness, but longing. A longing she understood, a longing to move when the world tried to pin you still. She recognized the quiet fight in him, the way he leaned slightly forward as if wanting to rise but tethered by something invisible. She felt it deep in her chest, the old ache of being trapped in a body or a life that the world had already decided the limits for. And in that recognition, she knew what she had to do. Richard watched her too closely, unsettled by the way she lingered near his son. He had seen the looks before, well-meaning strangers who bent down too far, softened their voices too much, who treated his boy like a fragile thing to be pitied. But this was different. There was no pity in her eyes, no trace of that sickly sweetness he despised. Her gaze was steady, curious, almost defiant, as though she dared to see his son for more than the chair that held him. Richard's instinct was to shut it down. He wanted to tell her to step back, to serve the meal, and disappear like every other waitress had done 1,000 times before. That was the unspoken contract he paid. They obeyed. The world kept its distance. Yet something in the quiet way his son responded stopped him. The boy's lips moved, the faintest curve of a smile tugging at his face, a look Richard had not seen in years. When the plates arrived, she did not bow her head or avoid eye contact the way others often did. She placed them gently, looked straight at his son, and asked almost like a friend would, "Do you like music?" Richard's chest tightened. His son gave a small nod. The exchange was brief, but it cracked something open. She didn't rush away. Instead, she crouched, leveling her eyes with his son's, her hand extended not in pity, but in invitation. The music from the band swelled in the background, a tender jazz tune wrapping around them like a thread pulling two souls together. Richard felt heat rising in his neck. This wasn't her place. A waitress had no right to step beyond her duty, no right to pull at wounds he had tried so hard to bury. Yet his son's trembling fingers lifted, drawn toward her as if pulled by gravity itself. The hand met hers unsteady, weak but alive. She whispered something Richard barely caught. "You lead." The words were like a spark in the dark. His son, who had forgotten how to move, lifted his hand a little higher. It was awkward, jagged, nothing close to the grace of the past, but in that clumsy motion there was power. For the first time in years, his boy was not being guided, not being pushed, not being managed. He was guiding her. He was the one leading, even from a chair that the world insisted defined him. Richard's throat burned as he watched, torn between rage at the breach of boundaries and awe at the fragile miracle unfolding in front of him. For Richard, the world seemed to slow until every sound blurred except the faint rhythm of the jazz band and the soft shuffle of his son's hand guiding hers. He had told himself countless times that his boy's spirit had dimmed, that the accident had stripped him of joy, that the silence in their home was the silence of defeat. But here, in front of him, was proof that he had been wrong. His son wasn't gone. He had been waiting, buried under the weight of Richard's fear, smothered by the shame his father carried like armor. The sight was too much. It broke him in places he didn't know could still be broken. The boy's movements were shaky, uncoordinated, yet there was grace in them. The kind of grace that came from courage, from a heart refusing to surrender. Richard realized with a jolt that he had denied his son this chance for years, choosing instead to shield him from a world he couldn't control. It hadn't been about protection. It had been about pride. He had been terrified that people would look and see weakness, and in that terror, he had hidden his child away, locking him in a prison built not of walls but of his father's own ego. Watching Maya now, Richard understood the cruelty of that mistake. And then another truth struck him harder. Maya herself, a waitress! Young. Someone Richard's world of wealth and privilege rarely allowed him to notice, let alone respect. Yet she was giving his son something no one else could. Doctors had failed. Therapists had failed. Endless sums of money had failed. But she, with nothing more than music and courage, had given his boy back the dignity of leading. Richard felt the bitter taste of his own prejudice rise in his throat. How many times had he dismissed people like her? How many times had he judged, avoided, or ignored because of skin, status, or station? And here she was in a uniform that hid the brilliance of who she really was, restoring something priceless. The weight of it pressed on him. His billions felt hollow, meaningless in comparison to the simple truth playing out before him. He had believed himself powerful, untouchable, a man who could shape the world. But all the while, he had been powerless to give his son what this young woman had just offered without hesitation, hope, agency, and the chance to be more than his chair. Richard's eyes burned as he watched, his hands gripping the table, every illusion he had built for himself beginning to crumble under the force of that fragile, beautiful dance. The spell of the moment was fragile, delicate, but it was real. Richard sat frozen, drinking in every second when the sharp crack of laughter split the air. It came from a corner table where a group of men in pressed suits leaned back with their drinks, smirking as if the world was theirs to mock. The sound was jagged, cruel, and it tore through the music like glass shattering on stone. Richard turned sharply, his chest tightening. One of the men leaned toward the other, whispering loud enough for half the room to hear. The cripple and the waitress. Another chuckled, raising his glass as if he told the best joke of the night. "Wish she doesn't know her place." The words hit Richard like fire to dry wood. For years, he had lived above such cruelty, distant from it, insulated by wealth. He had seen discrimination from afar, written about in papers or muttered behind closed doors, but never had it been so naked, so venomous, right in front of his child. His son's hand faltered slightly, the rhythm breaking, and Richard felt his heart wrench. He saw the faint shadow of old shame flicker across the boy's face, that same shadow Richard himself had fed by hiding him away. The laugher dug deep, not only at his son, but at Maya too, reducing her humanity to nothing more than skin and status. Something inside Richard snapped. All the years of silence, of swallowing back anger, of building walls instead of bridges, it all boiled to the surface. He had spent a lifetime avoiding discomfort, but in that moment, he could not sit still. He rose slowly but deliberately, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. The sound sharp in the stunned quiet. Every eye turned toward him, expecting perhaps an angry billionaire defending his pride, but his words came out cracked, raw, pulled from a place he had buried for too long. "My son is leading," he said, voice unsteady but firm. He pushed the wheelchair forward, not hiding, not shielding, but presenting his boy to the room as if to say, "See him, all of him." His hand trembled on the chair's handle, yet his voice grew steadier. "And the woman who gave him that chance is worth more than every cruel word you people will ever speak." The silence that followed was heavier than stone. The men at the corner shifted uncomfortably, their smirks faltering, but Richard didn't care. His gaze was fixed on Maya, who still held his son's hand with quiet defiance, refusing to let the moment break. For the first time in years, Richard felt no shame, no fear, only the fierce clarity of a man who had finally chosen to stand. That night, Richard's world cracked open. For years, he believed money built walls to keep pain away. But he learned that walls keep light out, too. His son didn't need a cure. He needed dignity, belief, a chance to lead even from a chair. And it was not a billionaire, not a doctor, not a man of power who gave it to him. It was a black waitress the world refused to see. Racism had tried to bury her. Discrimination had tried to silence her. But her humanity was louder than hate, stronger than wealth, purer than privilege. Richard left that restaurant not as a billionaire, not as a man of influence, but as a father reborn. He carried his son's hand in one palm and the weight of his awakening in the other. And for the first time, he understood true wealth is not what you own. It is what you give and who you choose to see.